Today, we're diving into a fascinating story about a major bank, a huge investment that completely vanished, and a tax battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. It all boils down to one simple but very expensive question. When a P16 million investment goes to zero, what kind of loss is it really?
All right, so here's how we're going to unpack this whole thing. We'll start with the P16 million problem itself, then look at the so-called worthless investment. We'll get into the two different kinds of loss, and trust me, this is key. Then we'll check out the actual language of the law, see how the Supreme Court made its call, and finally wrap up with why this case still matters so much today.
Let's start with a number, a very specific number, over 8.5 million pesos. This isn't just random. This figure is the entire reason this legal fight ever happened.
And there it is. That number was the tax deficiency notice that the Commissioner of Internal Revenue sent to China Banking Corporation. It sparked a massive legal debate over a much bigger number, that P16 million investment that went south.
Okay, so let's get into the facts. How did we get here? Where did this P16 million problem even come from? So the story kicks off with the pretty significant move by China Banking Corporation, or CBC. They made a big equity investment in one of their subsidiaries over in Hong Kong. Okay, so check this out. Back in 1980, CBC plunks down over 16 million pesos. But just 6 years later, in 1986, it's clear the subsidiary is insolvent. It's broke. So the very next year, CBC does what seems logical. They write the entire thing off as a loss on their tax return.
Now, here's the move that started the whole fight. CBC didn't just call it a loss, they called it an ordinary loss. And why does that matter? Well, an ordinary loss can be subtracted directly from their main business income, which, drastically lowers the amount of tax they have to pay.
But the tax authorities had a very different opinion. The Commissioner of Internal Revenue basically said, not so fast, we don't think that's an ordinary loss at all. And that disagreement is the central issue of this entire case.
You're probably thinking, come on, a 16 million peso loss is a 16 million peso loss. It's gone either way, but in the world of taxes, how you label that loss changes everything. This is literally the multi-million peso question.
And here's why it matters so much. If it's an ordinary loss, like CBC wanted, they can use it to shield their regular banking profits. But if it's a capital loss, they can only use it to cancel out profits from selling other investments, capital gains. And if they didn't have any capital gains that year, that massive P16 million deduction becomes completely useless.
So, to figure this out, the court did the only thing it could do. It didn't look at what was convenient or what made sense from a business perspective. It went straight to the rule book, the National Internal Revenue Code. Let's see what the law actually says.
What's interesting is how the law defines a capital asset. It doesn't tell you what it is, it tells you what it isn't. It's not your inventory, not the stuff you sell every day. So, by default, almost everything else you own for the long term, like an investment, falls into this capital asset bucket. And this table right here makes it crystal clear. If your actual business is buying and selling stocks, if you're a dealer, then stocks are your inventory, an ordinary asset. But CBC wasn't a stockbroker. They were an investor, holding these shares for long-term growth. And for an investor, those shares are capital assets, period. And then you find this section in the tax code, and it's incredibly specific. It says that if a security, which is a capital asset, becomes worthless, the law treats it as if you sold it. It's a deemed sale. So even though no money changed hands, the law says you have to classify the loss as a capital loss.
So with the law being that specific, you can probably see where this is going. Let's look at how the Supreme Court took these exact rules and applied them to reach their final decision.
The court's logic was just super straightforward, like a simple three-step process. First, they said, yep, CBC is an investor, not a dealer. Step 2, because they're an investor, these shares are a capital asset. And finally, step 3, the law says that when a capital asset like this becomes worthless, the result is a capital loss. Simple as that.
And this right here was the final word on the matter. The court pointed to this section, which basically says capital losses can only fight capital gains. You can't cross them over to fight your regular business income. It's like they're in two different arenas.
Oh, and that other argument CBC made, that it was a bad debt, the court shot that down too. The logic was simple. You can't have a debt from something you own. A stock is an ownership stake. A loan is something that has to be paid back. They are fundamentally different things.
So, after all that, what's the big picture here?
What are the lasting legal principles, the doctrines, that came out of this case that we all need to understand?
This case really carved 3 key rules into stone for tax law. 1. For an investor, stocks are capital assets. 2. If those stocks become worthless, it's a capital loss. And 3, which is the big one for anyone managing money, capital losses are stuck in their own lane. They can only be used to offset capital gains.
And so, the final outcome. The Supreme Court said no. They denied CBC's petition and agreed with the lower courts. That Piece 16.2 million deduction from ordinary income was disallowed, which means that 8.5 million peso tax bill was here to stay.
So, this leaves us with a final question to think about. Is this whole capital versus ordinary distinction just something for lawyers to argue about? Or is it actually a fundamental piece of the puzzle you have to understand to build a truly smart financial strategy? Something to think about.